I got married in 2012. We moved into our first house. It wasn't per se old. It fit the homes in the neighborhood. Nevertheless, from the first night I spent there, I could sense something wasn't right. Choosing to watch Lovely Molly that first night didn't help either. I just always had an eerie feeling like something or someone was near me. At night, I began to hear footsteps in my wife's makeup room. I'd sometimes go upstairs to see why she was pacing for so long, and always found her asleep in the bed. At one point, I entered the makeup room late at night. A black crayon we didn't even own rolled across the floor from some dark corner of the room. The corner that was always darker than the rest, and the one I felt eyes coming from. Fast forward 1 month. A bunch of friends were over for my wife's friend's birthday. We watched a scary movie in the dark. After we shut off all the lights, TV, everything, and my ex started talking about how I thought the place was haunted and how she believed it to be BS. Just at that moment, directly behind her friend, a framed, propped up picture of us fell forward onto the table. Not fell, but more like angrily slapped. Everyone shrieked, and then we all laughed. I laughed too, but more so to give off the impression that I wasn't scared. We got married and moved into our house in September 2012. In October, I started having what I thought were strokes. At the time, I was using a supplement which contained something called 1.3-dimethylamine hydrochloride, basically a fancy way to say meth. Without the FDA breathing down their necks, it was called Jack Thury. I'm sure many of you exercise freaks remember it. The doctors figured that was my problem and told me to stop, so I did. The panic attacks persisted. I went to the ER 11 times and saw 7 cardiologists. Funny thing is, these attacks only occurred in that house. It got to a point where even my ex would say, "You know, I'll be having a great day, but as soon as I walk in this house, I feel horrible." I took that as maybe she was just feeding off of my negativity, but I agreed. Something in there wasn't happy with us. We shouldn't have been there. The rest is short and concise. It had been months, maybe 4. Things would fall off the wall. We had a plate attached to some hooks in the wall, which said something about how a home is only a home with love, or some Hallmark bullshit. It was thrown halfway across the room. It shattered. We'd come home to find pictures all over the floors, toilet paper unraveled. Her explanation of this was that our 4LB teacup Pomeranian did it. No way he stood on his fucking hind legs for a minute straight and unraveled a toll of tapis that was way too high up for him anyway. And those footsteps, those incessant footsteps, never ending. The most horrifying moment was in late winter. My puppy was in my lap, and something caused him to stand at attention. His muscles were tense and solid as concrete. Unmoving, tail pointed to the ceiling. I heard the footsteps again, only this night they were especially active. I felt that the sanctity of our house was truly threatened. Henry growled just as the steps moved from the room to the hallway and then down the stairs into the living room. I didn't even try to look. I grabbed Henry and we ran out the front door and just watched the monolithic bricked entity leer down at me with those foreboding second-story windows as eyes and a yawning, aghast mouth for a door. Desperation. The basement was the worst part of the house. We both were terrified of it, and she would never go down there without me. Finally, we got what we were waiting for. Irrefutable proof before both of our eyes that something not of this earth was with us and that we needed to leave. Her stepdad and mom came over. My stepdad in law sat on the couch watching football. They were in the kitchen. We had a hanging plant in the dining room. Mind you, as this was all occurring, we had the front door opened so some air could get in through the glass screen door. So she's chatting with her mom about whatever. Suddenly, the flower pot began swinging. I mean swinging. Very forceful. I swear, even the wind from a horrible thunderstorm couldn't have gotten it to do this. My ex yelled out my name. I walked in and watched. Back and forth, back and forth. Something was pushing it. Finally, her mother had enough. And being the tough woman she was a captain at a jail after all. She screamed, "Whoever you are, you need to leave this house. It no longer belongs to you." The swinging slowly halted to a stop. When I turned around, the front door was slowly shutting on its own. No breeze, no wind. It didn't shut all the way, but just that creaky sound is enough to give anyone the heebie-jeebies. Within a few weeks, things started to get better, happier, but it didn't stay that way. It started all over again. Only much fiercer and uglier. The moment that made us consider really moving again was one night in the kitchen. We were making something and suddenly there was knocking on the wall. No joke. I have no other way to put it. Literal knocking, not hard or angry, very quaint, like a Jehovah's Witness. It scared us so much I almost spilled a pan full of burning grease all over me. The negativity came back. The footsteps came back. And that basement was akin to walking into a rung of hell. We moved out after a year. I drove past that house a few times later on after we'd been gone. Didn't notice anything. Except once. I slowly crept by and pulled over in front one evening. It wasn't light or dark, almost dusk. I was staring at something in the living room window. Curtains, perhaps. Something caught my eye. Then one of the curtains brushed to the side, and I saw a face. My heart skipped, and I was frozen. I actually jumped in my seat. No lights on inside. This is no BS. I looked closely. It may sound funny now, but it wasn't then. It looked like someone who was in the Revolutionary War. The entity had white hair, like an old powdered wig, a painting from the 18th century, just like the wig that Washington has on in all of his portraits. It looked at me still, very, very still and rigid. I couldn't make out much of the face, nor the eyes, which looked like little black buttons. Its expression was very droll, like the way your white-haired grandmother would give a child the death stare for stealing out of the cookie jar. Kind of like, "You do that again, you're in for it." Eerily, it gave me a look like it recognized me and was telling me, "Don't come near this house." I put the car in drive, and we watched each other as I drove away from a house with no cars in the driveway and a for sale sign on the lawn. I went home and told her. She said I was lying. That was until 3 years later. Her cousin's friend, who lived on that very street, aptly named Washington Avenue, told her that people would frequent that home and move out quickly. She never connected the dots. She said it was because there were projects not far down that road. I knew otherwise. All these years later, it spooks the hell out of me that we were in there with that thing I saw the entire time. Why didn't it show itself to me before? Had I seen it, or had either of us seen it prior to moving in, we wouldn't have. To this day, that year was one of the most powerful, disturbing points of my life. I'd also like to note that in the house I grew up in, which is the place my dad died in, I literally saw his ghost sitting in his favorite living room chair in the middle of the night. I'd never been so scared. This experience dwarfed that beyond all recognition. There's a man that lives in a duplex at the top of my street, 5 houses down from me. He's very strange, always in his front yard yelling, sometimes seemingly at no one. He's very wild-looking, just gives me a bad vibe. But before the encounter I'm going to describe, I wouldn't say I had any reason to be freaked out by him. Just had taken note. Like I said, he lives at the top of the street, which is off a busy main road in my town. Across from his duplex is a big empty double lot that we call the Glade. It's owned by the city and maintained well. It's a nice grassy place for me to take my dog to walk. I'd been walking my dog there for about 5 years, no issues. It's perfect. There's an old shed and some signs that a house used to be on the lot, but mostly it's just trees and bushes and grass. I noticed a few times it seemed like someone was trying to block up the pathway onto the lot, but thought maybe it was just the people who maintain the lot dumping the cuttings and stuff. So one morning, a few months back, I'm walking my dog before work, and I notice the odd neighbor is just staring at us from his stoop. I don't think he knew I could see him, as there's lots of bushes and stuff around the lot. He's just staring at you so intently, and I get kind of creeped out, but it's daytime and the busy street is right beside us. So I ignore him and let my dog finish, and we walk home. A few days later, same thing. I'm walking my dog, and I catch him intently watching us. This time, as I walk out of the lot and head towards my house, this guy starts to follow us. He is maybe 20 feet behind us, but keeping pace. My dog starts freaking out, and I kind of half turn and say good morning, but he doesn't answer, just stares ahead, and follows us all the way to my house. I turn down my driveway, trying to be casual, but my dog is just losing her mind. She's got her hackles raised, and she's pulling and growling. He doesn't follow me up the drive, thankfully. I turn back and look as we get in the house, and the guy has just walked about halfway past my house and just turns around and goes back to his house. He never even acknowledged me, but it was more creepy than I can describe. I still don't know what he was doing or why he didn't want me in that lot. Was he planning something and my dog changed his mind? Was he trying to scare me away from the lot? I can't imagine he's gotten anything hidden on it, as the city keeps it well maintained. Or is he just crazy? He still lives there, but I don't walk my dog that way anymore. My husband works nights, so it still creeps me out. Luckily, my dog is super protective and we have an alarm system. So this story happened around 10 years ago, when I was still a university student and a pretty naive girl. I had a late class, and after that, I hung out with my friends for a while. Soon I started feeling sleepy, so I decided to walk home. Being very socially awkward, I tried to avoid the main streets because it was full of people, so last minute I took a different route from the usual one. As I made my turn to the left, I got an overwhelmingly eerie feeling in my gut. I brushed it off since I was walking in a familiar neighborhood not too far from where I lived. As I was thinking that, I noticed the shadow of a tall man behind me. My first instinct was to change course, but I didn't want to be judged as weird. Trust me, I now know. Also, another guy further down the road was walking the same direction as me. The shadow behind me kept growing as he was coming closer, and his pace kept getting quicker and louder. My heart was beating like a drum. This went on for an uncomfortable amount of time, when suddenly the steps stopped. I decided I was going to turn around and look, but before I could react, I felt a strong shove from behind. As I stood there, frozen in shock, the man sprinted past me. The other guy, who was walking in the distance, turned around, came to me and asked, "Hey girl, did that other guy bother you?" That seemed suspicious, since he wasn't even looking my way. "How would you know? Nothing happened," I replied. My brain was screaming, "Danger!" He started following me, saying things like, "You look like you need my help," and "We should get to know each other." "Go away, I don't need you, leave me alone," I said, trying to get this guy off my back. I was so scared and needed to think fast. My first thought was calling a guy to scare him off. My boyfriend at the time would always reply to my calls 3 hours late, at best, so reaching him was not an option. My best friend, I thought to myself, she'll answer for sure. As I called her, the guy started getting agitated. "Hey baby, when are you coming?" I happily yelled. The guy sarcastically asked if my BF was gonna come to beat him up. I looked him dead in the eye and replied, "He's gonna beat the crap out of both of us when he gets here if you don't leave right now." I think that must have scared him because he started backing off. What made things even creepier was that he went the direction the tall guy ran towards. When he left, I ran home and cried. I didn't take that route for a long time. I feel like this was all choreographed against me, but I was lucky enough to overcome. If it was later in the night, though, I just moved into a terraced house somewhere in Ghent, Belgium. I worked in a bakery then, so most of the time I would leave the house around 5:15 a.m. I usually take my bike, which I park just in front of my front door. As I was preparing to leave, I left my door slightly ajar just in case I forgot something. I saw a man walking towards my direction. I thought, how strange. This guy is walking around the neighborhood with a cup of coffee in his hand at this hour. He stopped next to me, invading my space. He then greeted me and started asking me questions while giving me this horny, longing look. He kept edging closer to me. He asked me if I were living alone, if I were married or had children, how many of us are living in the house if I had just moved in. I kept avoiding his questions. I could sense he was onto something bad. My mind was screaming danger. I quickly shut my front door so he couldn't shove me back in. I looked him straight in the eyes and calmly said, "I know what you are thinking of doing. I recognize your face so I can identify you easily. If you don't walk away right now, I will call the police." He looked embarrassed and walked away with his head bowed down. I watched him until he disappeared in a corner. If I acted scared and small, that man could have easily pushed me inside my house and raped me. I heard of this kind of incident happening. I'm glad I was quick enough to assess the situation and slammed my front door shut immediately. I didn't run inside my house to show him I am in control of the situation and not him. If I did, I'm sure he would have come back to try his luck again. I went to work shaking but also relieved. I had to keep checking behind my back, of course, every time I leave the house early in the morning since then. I never saw him again after that incident.